Hello, my friend. Tonight, let's wander together through the quiet corners of the mind, exploring curious ways our thoughts and perceptions shape the world we see. Settle in, make yourself comfortable, and let your mind drift as we uncover these fascinating psychological effects, gently, slowly, like whispers in the dark. Chapter 1: The Pratfall Effect. The power of imperfection. The human mind is a curious observer. It is quick to judge, to evaluate, to decide whether someone is competent, trustworthy, or likable. We often think that the best way to impress others is to be flawless, to show no weaknesses, to maintain a perfectly polished image. And yet, decades of psychological research suggest the opposite may often be true. A small stumble, a tiny flaw, a harmless mistake. These things, under the right circumstances, can make people like you more. This is the essence of what psychologists call the Pratfall Effect, a phenomenon first documented in the 1960s by social psychologist Elliot Aronson. The term itself comes from the word pratfall, a slightly old-fashioned way of saying blunder or mishap. The kind you might see in a comedy sketch when someone trips over their own feet or spills coffee during a meeting. In everyday life, such moments might feel embarrassing, even undermining. But Aronson discovered that these moments of imperfection can paradoxically enhance a person's appeal, provided they already appear competent. His original experiment was deceptively simple, but elegant in its design. Participants listened to tape recordings of individuals answering quiz questions. In some versions of the tape, the quiz taker performed exceptionally well, demonstrating obvious competence, but at the end of the recording accidentally spilled a cup of coffee. In others, the same highly competent person did not make the blunder. In yet another version, the person performed poorly on the quiz and also spilled the coffee. When Aronson asked listeners to rate how likable each person seemed, the results were striking. The competent person who spilled coffee was rated as more likable than the competent person who made no mistake. The small error had humanized them, made them more relatable. But for the person who had already performed poorly, the mistake did not have this positive effect. If anything, it made them seem worse. The Pratfall Effect, it seemed, only worked when competence had already been established. Why would this be? Part of the answer lies in the way humans relate to one another. Flawlessness, while admirable, can create distance. A person who seems utterly perfect can also seem unapproachable, even intimidating. Their perfection highlights our own flaws by contrast, making it harder to feel a sense of kinship. A harmless mistake punctures that image, revealing that beneath the polished surface is someone like us, someone human. The warmth and authenticity that come from that realization can outweigh the negative impression caused by the error itself. There is also a cognitive component at work. Our brains are constantly trying to assess whether people around us are safe to interact with, socially, emotionally, and sometimes even physically. Perfection can trigger suspicion because it feels unnatural. When a person makes a minor blunder, it sends a subtle but important signal. They are not a calculated performance, but a real person. This aligns with what psychologists have observed in other domains of social perception. Authenticity often fosters trust. In the decades since Aronson's original study, researchers have replicated and expanded on the Pratfall Effect in a variety of contexts. In one set of experiments, hiring decisions were influenced by small errors during interviews. When job candidates were clearly competent but committed a minor, harmless slip, such as accidentally knocking over a pen, They were often perceived as warmer and more relatable by interviewers. In marketing research, brands that occasionally admitted to small, non-critical flaws in their products were sometimes perceived as more honest and trustworthy. A coffee company might admit that their beans are not the cheapest, but emphasize their quality and sustainability. This small imperfection in pricing could make them seem more genuine than a competitor claiming to have no downsides at all. Even in politics, something similar can be seen. Politicians who occasionally show a vulnerable side, a forgotten speech line, a spontaneous laugh at their own mistake, can come across as more genuine to voters. Of course, this works best when they have already established competence and credibility. An unqualified candidate making repeated mistakes does not benefit from the Pratfall effect. Instead, it simply reinforces perceptions of incompetence. The psychology of this phenomenon can also be connected to the broader principle of what some researchers call optimal distinctiveness. This is the idea that people want to feel unique, but not so unique that they become isolated. They want to connect, but not disappear into uniformity. A small imperfection helps to strike that balance in the social perception of others. It says, I am capable and skilled, but also human. I am not so perfect that you can't relate to me. There is also a subtle emotional mechanism at play. Empathy. When we see someone competent make a small mistake, we feel a pang of recognition. I've done that too. That recognition can be comforting. In a way, the Pratfall effect reassures us that even the people we admire are not free from everyday clumsiness or human error. However, it is important to note that the Pratfall effect does not apply universally. It depends heavily on context, the nature of the mistake, and the prior impression of the person. For example, in high-stakes professional environments where precision is critical, even a small blunder might not be seen as endearing. A surgeon dropping an instrument during an operation will not benefit from this effect, because in that situation, even a minor error carries weight. The same goes for airline pilots, engineers during safety inspections, or financial analysts handling sensitive transactions. In such contexts, competence must remain unquestioned, and small errors are not charming. They are concerning. Additionally, cultural norms play a role. In cultures where modesty is highly valued, people may respond more positively to signs of imperfection because they signal humility. In cultures that emphasize formality and high standards, even small visible mistakes might be seen as lapses in professionalism. Researchers studying cross-cultural psychology have found that while the general principle of the Pratfall effect can appear across different societies, its strength and acceptability can vary. Neuroscience also offers some insight into why the Pratfall effect occurs. Social evaluation processes in the brain involve regions like the medial prefrontal cortex and the temporoparietal junction, areas that help us interpret others' intentions and character. When a competent person makes a harmless mistake, these regions may help reframe our perception of them as warmer and more approachable, integrating this moment into our overall judgment. Meanwhile, the amygdala, which is involved in emotional processing, may generate a small burst of positive affect as we recognize the humanity in someone we otherwise saw as above us. Another interesting aspect is how self-perception interacts with this phenomenon. People who are comfortable in their competence are often less afraid of showing small imperfections. They may even laugh them off in a way that enhances their charm. On the other hand, those who feel insecure about their abilities often go to great lengths to hide any slip-up, missing opportunities to connect with others on a more human level. In this sense, the Pratfall effect can also be a reflection of underlying self-confidence. There are practical takeaways here for everyday life. Perfectionism, the belief that only flawless performance is acceptable, is not only exhausting, but may also be counterproductive in forming connections. A small, natural stumble in conversation, a harmless error in presentation, or an unpolished moment of honesty can sometimes make people warm to you more quickly than any carefully scripted perfection could. This is why some communication coaches even suggest intentionally allowing for small moments of unscripted authenticity during speeches or interviews to avoid seeming overly rehearsed. The Pratfall effect is, in a way, a gentle reminder of something deeply human. That people respond not just to skill and competence, but to warmth and relatability. It shows that social connection is not built only on being the best, but on being approachable. And it underlines the idea that we are not drawn to each other simply for what we can do, but for who we are, flaws and all. When you think about it, this has always been true in the way we form bonds. We tell stories not just of achievements, but of the funny mishaps along the way. We cherish not just the perfect photographs, but the candid ones where someone is laughing mid-bite or looking away. We remember not just the grand speeches, but the moments when someone faltered, then carried on with grace. These imperfections do not erase competence, they complete it. And so the Pratfall effect is not merely a curiosity in a psychology textbook. It is a subtle thread woven through the fabric of human interaction, one that allows us to see the humanity in others and perhaps in ourselves. In the quiet moments of reflection, we might even see a comforting truth in it, that the cracks in our perfect image are not weaknesses to be hidden, but openings through which connection can flow. In a universe so vast and indifferent, where perfection is rare and perhaps illusory, it is the small, clumsy, unplanned moments that make us feel most alive and most at home with one another. Chapter 2. The Placebo Effect. Belief as Medicine. The relationship between mind and body has fascinated scientists, physicians, and philosophers for centuries. For much of medical history, healing was as much an art of reassurance as it was a science of treatment. Today, we tend to think of medicine as an exact discipline rooted in measurable biochemistry and predictable physiology. Yet within this framework of modern science lies a quiet, persistent mystery. Sometimes, belief alone can change the state of the body. This is the essence of the placebo effect. The word placebo comes from the Latin for "I shall please." In medicine, a placebo is any treatment with no active ingredient relevant to the condition being treated. It could be a sugar pill, a saline injection, or even a sham surgical procedure. At first glance, such treatments should do nothing beyond satisfying a patient's expectation that they are receiving care. But in many cases, they produce real, measurable improvements. Pain lessens, symptoms ease, mood improves, and sometimes even physiological markers shift in a healthier direction. The placebo effect was first systematically documented in the 20th century, though its roots stretch far back in time. In ancient healing rituals, much of the benefit may have come from the patient's belief in the healer's power. Medieval physicians often relied on elaborate ceremonies, herbal remedies of uncertain efficacy, and strong displays of confidence. Even when the ingredients lacked pharmacological action, the context, the authority of the healer, the symbolism of the treatment, the patient's trust, could lead to recovery. Modern medicine first began to truly grapple with the placebo effect during the rise of clinical trials in the mid-1900s. Researchers found that when patients were given inert pills but told they might be receiving effective medication, many reported improvements. These were not imagined in the sense of being fabricated. The changes were subjectively real and sometimes objectively measurable. Pain thresholds increased, blood pressure shifted, even hormonal levels sometimes moved in the direction expected from the supposed treatment. One of the most famous early demonstrations came during World War II, when American anesthesiologist Henry Beecher ran out of morphine while treating wounded soldiers. Faced with soldiers in severe pain and no painkillers left, Beecher instructed nurses to inject them with saline solution while confidently telling them it was morphine. Many soldiers reported significant pain relief, enough to allow surgeries and wound treatments to proceed. Later, Beecher became a leading advocate for placebo-controlled trials, believing that without a proper comparison to an inactive treatment, the apparent benefit of many drugs could not be reliably measured. The mechanism behind the placebo effect is complex, involving both psychology and neurobiology. At the psychological level, expectation is a key driver. When a person anticipates relief, their brain can generate that relief through its own internal chemistry. The very act of believing a treatment will work can reduce anxiety, alter perception of symptoms, and focus attention on signs of improvement. In turn, these shifts can change the way the body functions. Neuroimaging studies have revealed some of the brain's role in this process. In placebo analgesia, pain relief triggered by a placebo, brain scans often show activation in areas such as the prefrontal cortex, which is involved in expectation and planning, and the anterior cingulate cortex, which modulates the emotional experience of pain. The brain also releases endogenous opioids, the body's natural painkillers, which bind to the same receptors as morphine and other analgesic drugs. In some studies, giving patients a drug that blocks opioid receptors also blocks placebo-induced pain relief, suggesting that part of the placebo effect is literally a biochemical mimic of medication. Beyond pain, placebos can influence many other systems. Placebo antidepressants can trigger increased activity in brain regions linked to mood regulation. Placebos given for Parkinson's disease can lead to increased dopamine release in the striatum, improving motor control temporarily. In irritable bowel syndrome, placebo treatments have been shown to improve symptoms even when patients are explicitly told they are receiving a placebo, a phenomenon sometimes called the open-label placebo. This finding is particularly intriguing because it suggests that some part of the brain responds to the ritual of treatment itself, not just the deception. The placebo effect is not purely a product of internal chemistry. The surrounding context matters enormously. The way a treatment is presented can magnify or diminish the effect. A confident, warm, and empathetic physician is more likely to elicit a strong placebo response than one who appears detached. A large, brightly colored pill can be more effective as a placebo than a small, plain one. 2 pills can be more effective than 1, and an injection can be more effective than pills. Even the cost of a treatment can affect its placebo power. People respond more strongly to a placebo they believe to be expensive than to one they think is cheap. The placebo's darker twin, the nocebo effect, reveals the same mind-body link in the opposite direction. If a patient expects a treatment to cause side effects, they may experience them even when given an inert substance. In one striking study, patients who were warned that a medication might cause gastrointestinal distress experienced nausea and discomfort at high rates, even when they were unknowingly given a placebo. The nocebo effect shows that negative expectations can harm as much as positive expectations can heal. From a scientific standpoint, the placebo effect has a double identity. On one hand, it is an obstacle. It makes it harder to know whether a new treatment is truly effective. This is why double-blind, placebo-controlled trials are the gold standard in medical research. Both patient and doctor must be unaware of who receives the real treatment and who receives the placebo, so that the psychological effects of expectation are evenly distributed. On the other hand, the placebo effect is a therapeutic tool in itself. If a patient's belief can relieve suffering, that is not nothing. It is a demonstration of the brain's ability to alter its own state. This raises an ethical challenge. If a placebo can help, is it ethical to use one in clinical practice? Traditionally, the answer has been no if it requires deception, because trust between doctor and patient is fundamental. But the discovery of open-label placebo effects complicates this rule. In certain conditions, telling a patient, "This is a placebo, but placebos can still work," has been enough to produce benefits. This hints at a future where placebo treatments could be openly incorporated into care for some conditions, especially those involving pain, mood, or functional symptoms without clear physical pathology. It is tempting to see the placebo effect as merely an illusion, a trick of perception without substance. But this underestimates the profound reality of what is happening. If your pain eases, your mood lifts, or your symptoms fade, the experience is real, regardless of the mechanism. The placebo effect shows that the body's internal pharmacy is powerful, and that the mind has keys to open it. Those keys are often forged in trust, hope, and the ritual of care. There is still much we do not understand. Why do some people respond more strongly to placebos than others? Why do placebos seem to work better for certain conditions? Can placebo responses be strengthened intentionally without deception? Researchers are beginning to investigate the genetic and personality factors that might predict placebo responsiveness. Some evidence suggests that traits such as optimism, suggestibility, and empathy sensitivity can influence how strongly someone responds. Neurobiological variability may also play a role. Differences in brain receptor density, neurotransmitter systems, or pain modulation pathways could make some individuals more prone to benefit from belief-driven healing. The placebo effect also blurs the line between psychological and physical illness. It reminds us that there is no sharp border where the mind stops and the body begins. Pain is a subjective experience mediated by the nervous system. Mood is a product of neurochemistry shaped by perception and memory. Even immune function and wound healing can be influenced by stress, expectation, and emotional state. Placebos work not by bypassing biology, but by using biology in a way that is shaped by belief. And so, the placebo effect is more than a curiosity to be accounted for in clinical trials. It is a window into the way the human brain constructs reality. If belief can change the body's chemistry in ways that are measurable and beneficial, then the act of healing is not just the delivery of molecules, but the cultivation of trust, hope, and meaning. This does not mean that belief alone can cure all ills. It cannot reverse an advanced infection, shrink a malignant tumor, or repair a broken bone. But within the boundaries of what the mind can influence, it can be surprisingly potent. In the end, the placebo effect may say as much about our need for meaning as it does about medicine. We are creatures who respond not just to what is done to us, but to the story around it. Who gave it, how it was given, what it was meant to do. The mind shapes not only our perception of the world, but the state of our bodies within it. And perhaps that is why the placebo effect feels so quietly profound. It is a reminder that in the long conversation between mind and body, belief is not just background noise. It is part of the language itself. In a way, it whispers something existential. In this vast and indifferent universe, where much lies beyond our control, there remains this small domain in which thought can shape reality. The placebo effect is a soft proof that the boundaries between belief and biology are not as rigid as they seem. It tells us that sometimes, to heal, it is enough to believe that healing is possible. And that in itself may be the most human medicine of all. Chapter 3. The Pygmalion Effect. Expectation creates reality. In every interaction we have, there is an exchange of information that goes far beyond the words we speak. We respond not only to what people say, but also to the unspoken signals they send, their tone of voice, their facial expressions, their posture, their pauses. Beneath all of this lies something deeper still, the beliefs they hold about us, whether consciously or not. Those beliefs and the expectations that grow from them have a way of shaping our behavior. In psychology, the name for this phenomenon is the Pygmalion effect, and it reveals a subtle but powerful truth. What others expect from us can influence what we become. The term comes from a Greek myth. Pygmalion was a sculptor who created a statue so beautiful and lifelike that he fell in love with it. Through his devotion, the goddess Aphrodite brought the statue to life. In the modern sense, the story has been taken as a metaphor for how belief and expectation can bring out latent qualities in people, turning potential into reality. In the scientific literature, the Pygmalion effect is a form of self-fulfilling prophecy, when someone's expectations about another person lead them to act in ways that causes expectations to come true. The most famous demonstration of the Pygmalion effect in psychology was carried out in the 1960s by Robert Rosenthal and Lenore Jacobson. In their experiment, elementary school teachers were told that certain students, identified through a supposedly specialized test, were poised for an unusual burst of intellectual growth in the coming year. The truth was that these students had been chosen at random. Yet, when the researchers returned months later, these bloomers showed significantly greater improvements in IQ scores compared to their classmates. The only difference had been the teacher's expectations. Believing that these students were capable of exceptional growth, the teachers had, often unconsciously, given them more encouragement, more challenging material, and more opportunities to succeed. Rosenthal's study caused a stir because it suggested that expectations could change measurable academic outcomes. But the implications reach far beyond the classroom. In workplaces, for example, managers who believe in the abilities of their team members often delegate more responsibility, offer more support, and provide feedback in ways that help employees thrive. In sports, coaches who expect their athletes to improve are more likely to offer tailored training and constructive guidance, which in turn boosts performance. Even in personal relationships, when one partner expects the best in the other, it can inspire them to live up to that vision. The mechanism behind the Pygmalion effect is subtle. It does not work through overt demands, but through hundreds of small behaviors that send signals of confidence or doubt. Teachers in Rosenthal's study did not suddenly praise their bloomers in grand, obvious ways. Instead, they might have smiled at them more often, called on them more frequently, given them more time to answer questions, or provided extra hints and encouragement. Over time, these micro-interactions shaped the student's own self-perception. They began to see themselves as capable, intelligent, and worthy of attention, and behaved accordingly. Self-perception plays a crucial role in the Pygmalion effect. When others treat us as though we are competent, we are more likely to believe that we are. This belief increases motivation, persistence, and resilience in the face of difficulty. In turn, our improved performance confirms the original expectation. The effect is cyclical. Expectations shape behavior, behavior shapes outcomes, and outcomes reinforce expectations. It is important to note that the Pygmalion effect has a darker counterpart known as the golem effect. Just as high expectations can elevate performance, low expectations can suppress it. When someone believes we are incapable, unmotivated, or unlikely to succeed, they may, often without meaning to, limit our opportunities, withdraw encouragement, and interpret our mistakes as signs of incompetence rather than moments for growth. Over time, this can become a self-fulfilling prophecy in the opposite direction. A student treated as though they will fail may stop trying. An employee who senses their manager's doubt may lose confidence and underperform. The golem effect demonstrates that expectation is a double-edged sword. It can be a force for growth or a quiet limiter of potential. Neuroscience offers some insights into why expectation has such a tangible effect. Human brains are exquisitely sensitive to social feedback. Positive reinforcement, a nod, a smile, a tone of approval, activates reward pathways involving dopamine, which in turn strengthens learning and motivation. Negative or dismissive signals can engage the brain's threat and stress systems, which tend to narrow focus, reduce risk-taking, and impair complex problem-solving. In this way, expectations communicated through social interaction can directly influence the brain states that govern performance. The Pygmalion effect is not just about interpersonal influence. It also works within the self. The expectations we hold for ourselves can shape our own development. If we believe we can improve, we are more likely to put in the effort, seek out learning, and persevere in the face of difficulty. This connects to the concept of a growth mindset, the belief that abilities can be developed through dedication and hard work, which has been linked to higher achievement in many domains. While a growth mindset is self-directed, the Pygmalion effect often begins externally. Someone else believes in us first, and we gradually adopt that belief as our own. Of course, the Pygmalion effect is not magic. High expectations alone cannot overcome all obstacles, nor can they instantly transform performance. Skills still require practice, and challenges still demand effort. The effect works within the boundaries of what is realistically possible. If expectations are wildly unrealistic, they can backfire, leading to frustration or burnout. The most powerful expectations are those that stretch us just beyond our current ability, but remain attainable with sustained effort and support. One reason the Pygmalion effect can be so powerful is that humans are deeply social creatures. Our sense of identity is partly constructed from how others see us. From early childhood, we look to caregivers for signals about who we are and what we can do. Later, we calibrate our self-image against feedback from teachers, peers, mentors, and colleagues. The reflections we see in their eyes can alter the story we tell ourselves about our capabilities. In this way, expectation operates not as a blunt command, but as a narrative that seeps into our self-concept. In educational research, the Pygmalion effect has prompted efforts to train teachers in expectation awareness. By recognizing their own biases, whether based on prior grades, behavior, or even unconscious stereotypes, educators can take steps to ensure they give all students the kind of encouragement and challenge that fosters growth. Similar approaches have been applied in corporate leadership training, where managers are taught to actively communicate belief in their team's abilities and to back that belief with concrete opportunities for development. There are also implications for parenting. Children are acutely aware of their parents' expectations, and these expectations can shape not only performance but also emotional well-being. Supportive, high expectations tend to promote confidence and resilience. Unrealistically high or punitive expectations, however, can generate anxiety and fear of failure. Striking the right balance is essential. Belief in potential, coupled with acceptance of imperfection. It is worth noting that while the Pygmalion effect is well documented, it is not always easy to measure in real-world settings. Human interactions are complex, and many factors contribute to performance. But the pattern has been observed across multiple contexts, suggesting that it is a robust feature of social life. At its heart, it is about alignment. When the story others hold about us is a story we can grow into, the alignment of belief and reality can produce remarkable results. Thinking about the Pygmalion effect invites us to consider the invisible influence we exert on each other. Every time we interact, we are, in small ways, shaping someone else's sense of what is possible for them. The tone we use when offering feedback, the opportunities we provide, the patience we show, all of these send signals that can expand or shrink the space in which someone feels they can move. It also asks us to reflect on the expectations we carry for ourselves. Do we allow ourselves to imagine growth, or do we quietly assume that our abilities are fixed? If someone else's belief can help us exceed our own expectations, perhaps our own belief in ourselves can do the same. The boundary between external and internal expectation is porous. What begins in another's mind can become the lens through which we see ourselves. And so, the Pygmalion effect is not just a curiosity of social psychology. It is a reminder that we live in a network of mutual influence, where the stories we hold about each other help to shape the reality we all inhabit. If belief can become self-fulfilling, then choosing to believe in the best within others is not just kindness. It is a way of participating in their growth. In quieter moments, this truth takes on an existential softness. In a universe indifferent to our struggles, we still have the capacity to give each other the gift of belief. A few words, a patient smile, a well-timed encouragement can ripple outward, altering the trajectory of another life. We are sculptors, not of marble, but of possibility. And sometimes the most enduring works we create are the ones we shape in each other's minds. Chapter 4. Cognitive Dissonance. Making beliefs fit your actions. Human beings like to think of themselves as coherent. We tell ourselves that our beliefs guide our actions, that our values shape our choices, and that our decisions follow a rational path. And yet, in the quiet spaces between thought and behavior, there's often a subtle tension. Sometimes we act in ways that contradict what we believe. Sometimes our choices run counter to the stories we tell about ourselves. When this happens, a kind of psychological discomfort emerges, a pressure to bring things back into alignment. Psychologists call this cognitive dissonance. The concept was first formalized in the 1950s by Leon Festinger, who described it as the mental unease experienced when a person holds two or more contradictory beliefs, values, or attitudes, or when behavior conflicts with beliefs. This discomfort is not just abstract. It creates a drive to reduce the inconsistency, to bring beliefs and actions back into harmony. Sometimes people do this by changing their behavior. More often, they adjust their beliefs or reinterpret the situation so that what they have done feels consistent with what they believe. One of the earliest and most influential experiments on cognitive dissonance was conducted by Festinger and his colleagues in 1959. Participants were asked to perform a deliberately tedious task, such as turning wooden pegs for an hour, a task designed to be boring and repetitive. Afterwards, some participants were asked to tell the next participant that the task was enjoyable. One group was paid a small sum for doing this, $1, and another group was paid a larger sum, $20. Later, when asked how much they actually enjoyed the task, those paid only $1 reported finding it more enjoyable than those paid $20. Why? The participants who received a large payment could easily justify telling the lie. They had done it for the money. Those paid only $1 had no such external justification. To resolve the dissonance between "I am an honest person" and "I just told someone this boring task was fun," they changed their internal view, convincing themselves that perhaps the task wasn't so bad after all. This was easier than seeing themselves as dishonest. The finding was a striking demonstration that when actions and beliefs are misaligned, people will often change the belief to match the action. Cognitive dissonance is not confined to laboratory experiments. It plays out constantly in everyday life. A person who values health but smokes cigarettes might downplay the risks or tell themselves they will quit soon. Someone who cheats on a diet might reason that it's a special occasion, or that they deserve a reward. After making a difficult purchase, buyers often convince themselves it was the right choice, even if they initially had doubts. People who have invested years in a project that is failing may double down rather than admit it was a mistake. These rationalizations are not necessarily deliberate falsehoods. They are often genuine shifts in perception, aimed at restoring a sense of internal consistency. The phenomenon has been observed across cultures and situations, though the way it manifests can vary. In collectivist cultures, for instance, dissonance may arise more strongly when actions conflict with group expectations, whereas in individualist cultures, it may be more tied to personal values. But the underlying drive is universal. Humans seek coherence between their self-image and their behavior. Neuroscientific research has begun to uncover some of the brain mechanisms involved in cognitive dissonance. Functional imaging studies suggest that the anterior cingulate cortex, a region associated with conflict monitoring, becomes active when people experience dissonance. This activation may serve as a kind of neural alarm, prompting the brain to resolve the inconsistency. Other areas, such as the prefrontal cortex, are involved in adjusting beliefs or attitudes to reduce the conflict. In this way, cognitive dissonance is not merely a philosophical idea, but a measurable psychological and neurological process. Dissonance is particularly powerful in situations where people have made an irreversible choice. After a decision, we tend to focus on the positive aspects of the chosen option and downplay the positives of the rejected alternatives. This post-decision rationalization is another way the mind reduces dissonance. It helps us feel confident that we have acted wisely, even when other choices might have been equally good or better. The drive to reduce dissonance can sometimes lead people to make better choices, but it can also lead them astray. On the positive side, if someone behaves generously, they may adjust their self-concept to see themselves as a generous person, which can encourage further generosity. On the negative side, it can entrench harmful behaviors. Someone who has acted unethically may reshape their moral reasoning to justify the act, making it easier to repeat in the future. An interesting aspect of cognitive dissonance is that it can be harnessed deliberately. In persuasion and behavior change, people sometimes use small commitments to set the stage for larger changes. If someone makes a small public statement in favor of an idea, they may later align their behavior with that idea to maintain internal consistency. This is part of why signing pledges, making public goals, or declaring intentions can influence future actions, even without external enforcement. In therapy and counseling, understanding cognitive dissonance can help clients recognize the ways in which they may be rationalizing harmful choices or avoiding necessary change. By gently confronting the mismatch between stated values and actual behavior, therapists can help clients resolve dissonance in ways that promote growth rather than defensiveness. The effect can also be seen in social and political domains. People who strongly identify with a group may reinterpret contradictory evidence to avoid dissonance. If a political leader they admire acts in ways that conflict with their values, they might change how they interpret the leader's actions rather than revise their opinion of the leader. This selective perception is not unique to any ideology. It is a general feature of human cognition. Importantly, cognitive dissonance is not the same as simple hypocrisy. Hypocrisy involves knowingly acting in contradiction to one's stated beliefs without necessarily feeling discomfort. Dissonance, by contrast, is that discomfort, the felt need to bring beliefs and actions back into alignment. The person experiencing dissonance may not even be fully aware of it, yet it can still guide their thinking and behavior. From an evolutionary perspective, the tendency to reduce dissonance may have served a stabilizing function. In social groups, consistency in beliefs and behavior builds trust and predictability. A mind that quickly resolves internal contradictions may maintain a more coherent identity, which in turn could help maintain stable relationships and social cohesion. The cost is that this mechanism can sometimes prioritize internal comfort over external accuracy. We may prefer to believe what feels consistent rather than what is objectively true. The paradox of cognitive dissonance is that it both reflects and protects our sense of self. We want to see ourselves as good, competent, moral people. When our actions challenge that self-image, we have two options: change the action or change the belief. Often, changing the belief feels easier, less disruptive, and more immediately relieving. Over time, these small adjustments accumulate, subtly reshaping our worldview to fit our behavior. Recognizing cognitive dissonance in ourselves can be uncomfortable, but it can also be a path to growth. By noticing when we are rationalizing instead of reflecting, we can choose to align our actions more closely with our values, or to honestly revise our values in light of new understanding. The key is to approach these moments with curiosity rather than defensiveness. In the quiet truth of cognitive dissonance lies a broader insight. The stories we tell ourselves are not static. They bend and shift to keep us feeling whole. This adaptability is part of our resilience, allowing us to move forward even after missteps. But it also means that our sense of truth is sometimes shaped more by the need for inner peace than by the need for objective accuracy. And in that, there is something faintly existential. In the vast, indifferent universe, our minds are not always searching for truth. They are searching for coherence. We smooth the rough edges of our contradictions, not to better understand the world, but to better live within it. Perhaps in the end, what we call making sense is simply the mind's way of keeping itself intact. Chapter 5. The Dunning-Kruger Effect. The confidence of the unskilled human beings are not perfectly accurate judges of their own abilities. We may strive for self-awareness, but the mind often works with imperfect information, giving us a distorted picture of our competence. Sometimes we underestimate ourselves, shrinking from challenges we are capable of meeting. At other times, we overestimate our skills, assuming we are more capable than we truly are. This second pattern is particularly intriguing because it appears to follow a consistent psychological curve. Those with the least knowledge or skill in a domain are often the most confident about their abilities. This phenomenon is known as the Dunning-Kruger effect. The name comes from a 1999 study by social psychologists David Dunning and Justin Kruger at Cornell University. Their research was inspired by an unusual real-world case, a man named MacArthur Wheeler, who attempted to rob banks in broad daylight without a disguise, confident he could not be seen by security cameras. His reasoning was that rubbing lemon juice on his face would make him invisible to cameras, based on the fact that lemon juice can be used as invisible ink. It was, of course, a complete misunderstanding of how light and cameras work. Wheeler's confidence was not diminished by his lack of knowledge. In fact, it was partly caused by it. Dunning and Kruger hypothesized that the skills required to perform a task well are often the same skills needed to recognize whether one is performing it well. If a person lacks those skills, they may also lack the ability to recognize their own mistakes or gaps in knowledge. In other words, incompetence robs people not only of accuracy but of the awareness that they are inaccurate. To test this, the researchers conducted a series of experiments in which participants completed tasks related to humor, grammar, and logical reasoning. Afterward, participants were asked to estimate their performance relative to others. The results were striking. Those who scored in the lowest quartile consistently overestimated their abilities, often placing themselves well above average. By contrast, those who scored in the highest quartile tended to underestimate themselves slightly, assuming others had performed nearly as well as they had. The Dunning-Kruger effect is not about simple arrogance or intentional self-deception. It is more about a cognitive blind spot. Lacking expertise, people often do not know what they do not know. Their mental model of the skill is incomplete, so they cannot accurately compare their own performance to an expert standard. As Dunning himself has put it, incompetent people do not recognize, scratch that, cannot recognize just how incompetent they are. One important nuance is that the effect is domain-specific. Someone may be highly skilled and accurate in self-assessment in one area, but overconfident in another. A brilliant mathematician might assume they are also a good communicator without realizing they struggle with clarity. A talented musician might believe they understand recording technology better than they actually do. The effect arises when skill gaps are invisible from the inside. It is also worth noting that the effect is not limited to extreme incompetence. Even moderate skill deficits can produce a version of it. The less you know about a subject, the easier it is to think you understand it well, because you have not yet encountered the complexities and exceptions that challenge easy answers. Novices may feel confident because they are unaware of the vast landscape beyond their current knowledge. As learning progresses, that initial confidence often drops, leading to what some call the valley of despair on the Dunning-Kruger curve. Only after sustained practice and study does confidence begin to rise again, this time on a more accurate foundation. The Dunning-Kruger effect has been replicated across a wide range of fields, from chess to driving ability, from medical diagnostics to sports performance. In each case, the same general pattern emerges. The least skilled tend to be the most overconfident, and the most skilled tend to be more modest in their self-assessment. This modesty among experts can stem from greater awareness of the field's complexity and from knowing how much there still is to learn. Neuroscience research into metacognition, the ability to evaluate one's own thinking, suggests that brain regions such as the anterior prefrontal cortex play a role in accurate self-assessment. When these regions are engaged, people are better able to detect errors and calibrate their confidence appropriately. A lack of skill can mean less accurate feedback from these monitoring systems, allowing overconfidence to persist. The effect has important real-world consequences. In education, students who are unaware of their own misunderstandings may study inefficiently, focusing on material they already grasp, while ignoring areas where they need improvement. In the workplace, employees who overestimate their competence may take on tasks beyond their abilities, leading to costly errors. In medicine, overconfident practitioners who fail to seek a second opinion can make diagnostic mistakes. And in public discourse, individuals who lack deep understanding of complex issues may speak with great certainty, influencing others despite limited expertise. One challenge in addressing the Dunning-Kruger effect is that feedback alone is not always enough. People often dismiss feedback that conflicts with their self-image, especially if it threatens their sense of competence. This can create a reinforcing loop. Overconfidence leads to errors, but those errors are either unnoticed or explained away, allowing overconfidence to persist. However, the effect is not inevitable. Training in metacognitive skills, learning how to monitor one's own thought processes, can help. Encouraging a culture of constructive feedback and making it safe to admit uncertainty can also reduce the effect's impact. In some contexts, structured self-assessment exercises paired with objective performance data can help people calibrate their self-perception more accurately. The Dunning-Kruger effect has a mirror image in what is sometimes called the imposter phenomenon, when competent individuals underestimate their abilities and fear being exposed as frauds. Both phenomena involve mismatches between perceived and actual competence, but in opposite directions. In fact, highly skilled people sometimes assume that because tasks feel easy to them, they must be easy for everyone else, leading to underestimation of their own expertise. This humility can be socially appealing, but it may also hold people back from sharing valuable knowledge. Cultural context can shape how the Dunning-Kruger effect appears. In societies that reward self-promotion, overconfidence may be more visible and socially reinforced, even if it does not match reality. In cultures that value humility, overestimation may be more subtle or even masked, but it can still influence decision-making. The effect is not about loudness or showiness. It is about the internal miscalibration between self-perception and actual skill. Interestingly, the effect is not entirely negative. Some overconfidence can be motivating, encouraging people to take on challenges they might otherwise avoid. Trying something outside one's skill range can lead to growth, even if the attempt is clumsy at first. But persistent overconfidence without corresponding learning leads to stagnation. The key is whether confidence is coupled with openness to feedback and willingness to adjust. It is also important to see the Dunning-Kruger effect not as a flaw unique to other people, but as a human tendency that can affect anyone. We are all novices at something. In those areas, our self-assessment may be less accurate than we think. Recognizing this possibility is the first step toward more honest self-evaluation. From an evolutionary perspective, overconfidence may have had some adaptive value. In uncertain environments, believing in one's ability to succeed could have encouraged risk-taking that sometimes led to rewards. But in complex modern systems, where specialized expertise is often required, misplaced confidence can be costly. Ultimately, the Dunning-Kruger effect reminds us of the gap between knowing and knowing that we know. True competence involves not just skill, but the ability to recognize the limits of that skill. This awareness can be uncomfortable, but it is the foundation of growth. It allows us to seek learning rather than defend illusions, to refine our abilities rather than protect our pride. And in the quiet reflection this invites, there is an existential undertone. In the immensity of all there is to know, each of us walks with only a small lamp of understanding. Sometimes we mistake its glow for daylight. The humility to remember the size of the unknown is perhaps the truest sign of wisdom, and the surest way to keep walking forward. Chapter 6. The Anchoring Effect. The Power of First Impressions. When people make judgments, they often think they are drawing on a wide range of evidence, carefully weighing the facts before coming to a conclusion. But in many cases, their final decision is disproportionately influenced by one single piece of information, the first one they encounter. This is the essence of the anchoring effect, a robust cognitive bias in which an initial number, estimate, or idea becomes a mental reference point, an anchor that subtly pulls subsequent thinking toward it. Anchoring was first described in a systematic way in the 1970s by psychologists Amos Tversky and Daniel Kahneman, whose research into cognitive biases helped reveal the often surprising ways in which the human mind takes shortcuts. They found that when people are exposed to an initial value, even one that is irrelevant or random, their later estimates tend to gravitate toward that value. This happens even when people are fully aware that the first number should not logically influence their decision. One of their classic demonstrations involved asking participants to spin a rigged wheel of fortune that would land on either 10 or 65. Then, the participants were asked whether the percentage of African nations in the United Nations was higher or lower than that number. Finally, they were asked to guess the actual percentage. Those who had seen the number 10 gave median estimates of about 25%. Those who had seen 65 guessed about 45%. The number on the wheel, completely unrelated to the actual question, had pulled their judgments toward it. The anchoring effect is not limited to abstract guessing games. In real life, it shapes decisions in subtle but powerful ways. In retail settings, an initial price tag can anchor what customers see as reasonable. If a jacket is first shown with a price of $400 and then discounted to $250, many shoppers feel they are getting a bargain, even if the jacket's actual value is much less. The $400 acts as an anchor, making $250 seem far more acceptable than it would if encountered on its own. Negotiation is another domain where anchoring plays a major role. The first number put on the table often sets the tone for the entire discussion. A seller who opens with a high asking price may end up with a better deal than one who starts lower, because the negotiation tends to revolve around adjustments from that first figure. Even if the final agreement is far from the original anchor, it is often closer to it than it would have been without it. Anchoring can also influence judgments in more personal contexts. People may form first impressions of others based on a single comment, an initial appearance, or a brief interaction, that become anchors for how they interpret that person's later behavior. If someone makes a strong first impression of competence, subsequent mistakes may be overlooked as outliers. Conversely, a poor first impression can make later successes seem like flukes. The effect is particularly insidious because it is largely unconscious. People often believe they are making independent judgments, unaware of how much the first piece of information has shaped their thinking. Even experts are not immune. Studies have found that judges give higher sentences when asked to consider higher numbers beforehand, even if those numbers are arbitrary. Real estate agents can be influenced by the listing price of a property, despite their training to focus on objective market data. Psychologists have identified several mechanisms that may explain anchoring. One is the idea of insufficient adjustment. When people start with an initial value, they adjust their estimate away from it based on additional information. But the adjustment is often too small, leaving the final judgment closer to the anchor than it should be. Another possibility is that the anchor activates related information in memory, making it easier to recall reasons that support a value near the anchor. The mind tends to search for confirming evidence rather than disconfirming evidence, so the anchor subtly shapes the direction of the search. Neuroscience has provided some insight into why anchoring happens. Brain imaging studies suggest that anchors influence the activity of regions involved in numerical cognition, such as the intraparietal sulcus, and areas involved in decision-making, like the prefrontal cortex. The brain seems to encode the anchor as part of the problem representation, making it difficult to fully detach from it even when it is irrelevant. This suggests that anchoring is not simply a mental slip, but an embedded feature of how the brain processes information. While anchoring can lead to systematic errors, it is not always harmful. In situations where there is genuine uncertainty, starting with an anchor can provide a useful reference point. It can simplify complex judgments, allowing people to make faster decisions. However, in domains where accuracy matters and bias can be costly, such as legal judgments, financial decisions, or medical diagnoses, anchoring can be problematic. One striking finding is that even arbitrary or self-generated anchors can influence decisions. In experiments, people asked to write down the last 2 digits of their social security number before bidding in an auction tended to bid higher amounts if their digits were higher, despite the numbers having no logical connection to the items being sold. This demonstrates just how easily the mind latches onto any available value as a starting point. Awareness of anchoring does not necessarily eliminate it. Tversky and Kahneman found that even when participants were explicitly warned about the bias, their estimates still showed strong anchoring effects. This persistence makes anchoring one of the more stubborn cognitive biases, resistant to correction through simple awareness. That said, there are strategies that can help reduce its influence. One is to deliberately generate multiple perspectives or estimates before settling on a conclusion, forcing the mind to move away from the initial anchor. Another is to start with a blank slate approach when evaluating a situation, avoiding early exposure to numbers or values that could unduly influence judgment. In negotiations, being the one to set the first number can be advantageous, but when responding to another's anchor, it can help to explicitly reframe the discussion around independent criteria. In everyday life, recognizing the anchoring effect can help us make more deliberate choices. When confronted with a price, a rating, or a first impression, it is worth asking, what would I think if I had never seen that initial number or heard that first detail? This mental exercise can create a bit of distance between the anchor and the judgment, reducing its pull. The anchoring effect also has a social dimension. First impressions in relationships, whether personal or professional, can be powerful anchors that shape all subsequent interactions. This can be helpful when the first impression is positive, but it can also lock people into overly fixed views of each other. Remaining open to updating those views based on new evidence is a way of countering the inertia that anchors create. Anchoring also plays a subtle role in how we perceive and remember our own experiences. If the first day of a trip is unusually stressful, it can color our perception of the entire journey, even if the following days are pleasant. Conversely, a wonderful beginning can make later disappointments seem less significant. In this way, anchoring is not just about numbers or negotiations. It is also about the emotional reference points that set the tone for how we process events. Another interesting application is in self-assessment. People often anchor their perception of their own progress or success to an early benchmark, such as their first job salary, their initial performance in a sport, or their starting level in a skill. Even years later, these anchors can influence how they feel about their achievements. This can be motivating if the anchor represents a humble beginning and progress feels tangible. But it can also be limiting if the anchor creates a fixed idea of one's capabilities, preventing recognition of genuine growth. From a broader perspective, the anchoring effect reveals something about how humans construct reality. We like to imagine that our judgments are formed from the ground up, built on evidence and reason. But in practice, our minds often build around whatever foundation happens to be laid first, even if it is shaky. That initial frame of reference exerts a quiet gravitational pull, bending our thoughts in its direction. And in that, there is a faintly existential lesson. Our view of the world is never entirely free-floating. It is moored to the anchors of past experiences, first impressions, and early assumptions. These anchors can guide us toward stability, but they can also keep us from drifting to new horizons. To see more clearly, we sometimes have to loosen the rope, letting go of the first thing we grabbed onto and allowing ourselves to navigate by a wider sky. Chapter 7. The Spotlight Effect. You're not being watched that closely. For much of human history, survival depended on being attuned to the eyes of others. In small, tightly knit groups, the gaze of the community could mean acceptance or rejection, safety or danger. Even today, in our far more complex and anonymous societies, we remain exquisitely sensitive to the possibility of being observed. We carry within us a deep awareness of how we might appear to others, and often assume that our appearance, words, and actions are under much closer scrutiny than they really are. This tendency is known in psychology as the spotlight effect, the belief that we are standing in the center of other people's attention far more often than we truly are. The term was first introduced in the late 1990s by social psychologists Thomas Gilovich, Victoria Medvec, and Kenneth Savitsky, who sought to measure just how strongly people overestimate the degree to which they are noticed by others. Their research was based on a simple but elegant idea. If people think of themselves as being under a spotlight, they will assume that their actions, appearance, and mistakes are being observed and remembered by far more people than actually notice them. In one of their most cited experiments, college students were asked to wear a t-shirt featuring an image they found mildly embarrassing. In one version of the study, it was a shirt with a large picture of the singer Barry Manilow. The participants were then asked to enter a room where other students were already seated, complete a brief task, and leave. Later, the t-shirt wearers were asked to guess how many people in the room had noticed and could identify the image on the shirt. Their estimates were, on average, about twice as high as the actual number. The reality was that most people in the room were too focused on themselves, their own thoughts, or the task at hand to give much attention to what someone else was wearing. This finding is not limited to clothing or physical appearance. People tend to overestimate how memorable their verbal slip-ups are, how noticeable their awkward moments seem, and how much others dwell on their minor mistakes. The truth is that most of these moments fade quickly from other people's minds, often within minutes or hours. While we replay our own missteps over and over internally, the people around us are generally too preoccupied with their own concerns to give them sustained attention. The spotlight effect has a straightforward cognitive explanation. Our own experiences are naturally centered on ourselves. Our perceptions, our decisions, our sensations. We are, to ourselves, the most important figure in the room, simply because our consciousness has no other vantage point. This egocentric perspective can unconsciously shape how we imagine the minds of others. Without meaning to, we project our own level of self-focus onto them, assuming they are devoting as much mental energy to us as we do to ourselves. Neuroscience supports this interpretation. Brain regions involved in self-referential thinking, such as the medial prefrontal cortex, are highly active when we reflect on our own appearance, behavior, and social standing. When we try to imagine what others are thinking about us, these same networks often remain engaged, making it difficult to fully shift out of the self-focused frame. As a result, our mental model of other people's attention is unconsciously biased toward overestimating our importance in their perception. This miscalibration can have significant social consequences. People who believe they are under constant observation may experience heightened social anxiety, worrying excessively about how they are being judged. They might avoid taking risks, speaking up, or trying new things for fear of embarrassment. The irony is that this fear of judgment is itself often unnoticed by others. The anxious individual is a far smaller part of other people's mental landscape than they imagine. The spotlight effect is not purely negative. It can also encourage self-awareness and guide social behavior in constructive ways. Caring about how one is perceived can motivate politeness, conscientiousness, and cooperation. But when the imagined scrutiny far exceeds reality, it can become a source of unnecessary stress. The line between healthy social awareness and paralyzing self-consciousness is not always easy to draw. One fascinating aspect of the spotlight effect is that it operates even in people who are aware of it. Much like the anchoring effect in decision-making, simply knowing the bias exists does not entirely free us from it. In experimental replications, participants who were told beforehand that people generally overestimate how much attention others pay to them still overestimated the attention they received, though slightly less than uninformed participants. This persistence suggests that the bias is deeply embedded in our cognitive architecture. There are ways, however, to soften its grip. One approach is to deliberately shift focus outward, paying more attention to the people and environment around us and less to our own imagined image within it. This outward focus can reduce the intensity of self-consciousness by making it clear just how many competing elements are vying for others' attention. Another is to reflect on our own memory of others' mistakes and realize how fleeting those memories often are. Most people, when honest, can recall only a handful of embarrassing things others have done, and many of those memories are softened or even fond in hindsight. The spotlight effect is also closely tied to first impressions. While it is true that first encounters can anchor our perception of someone, as discussed in the previous chapter, those impressions are rarely formed from exhaustive scrutiny. Instead, they are often quick, intuitive assessments influenced by context, mood, and a few salient details. The rest of our behavior in those early moments may matter less than we think, though we may still carry a belief that every word or gesture was being evaluated. It is worth noting that the spotlight effect can vary with context and personality. In unfamiliar social situations or among strangers, self-consciousness often intensifies, amplifying the bias. Conversely, among trusted friends or in familiar settings, the perceived scrutiny may fade. People high in trait self-consciousness, those who are naturally more attuned to how they come across, tend to experience a stronger spotlight effect, as do those who have recently undergone socially significant events, such as starting a new job or joining a new group. Technology and social media add an interesting dimension. In online spaces where posts, photos, and comments can be replayed and re-examined, the belief that others are closely watching may have more truth to it than in fleeting in-person encounters. Yet even here, people tend to overestimate how much others dwell on their individual contributions. The sheer volume of content online means that attention is fragmented. Most people are far more focused on their own output than on analyzing anyone else's in detail. There is also a cultural layer to the spotlight effect. In societies where reputation is emphasized and public image plays a large role in social standing, the sense of being observed may be more pronounced. This can intensify self-consciousness and make the bias feel more real. In cultures where individuality and personal freedom are highly valued, the spotlight effect may still occur, but may be less tied to fear of social sanction. Reducing the spotlight effect is not about ignoring social feedback altogether. Rather, it is about bringing our perception of others' attention into better alignment with reality. This involves recognizing that while we are the central figure in our own story, we are supporting characters, sometimes barely noticed, in most of the stories playing out around us. The relief that comes from understanding this can be profound. Over time, many people find that moments they once thought were socially defining turn out to have left no mark on anyone else's memory. The nervous speech, the shirt with an unexpected stain, the clumsy remark at a gathering, these events fade from collective awareness almost as soon as they occur. They remain vivid only in the mind of the person who experienced them, replayed in an internal theater long after the audience has dispersed. In the end, the spotlight effect offers a kind of quiet permission. It says that the world's gaze is not fixed on you as tightly as you think. That much of the time, you are free to experiment, to risk small mistakes, to be less than perfect, because most people will not notice, and fewer still will remember. It is a reminder that the story you imagine others are telling about you is often one you have written yourself. And perhaps that is where the existential note emerges. In a universe so vast, with countless lives intersecting for brief moments, our imagined importance in the eyes of others is a fragile construct. We walk through life believing we are under constant observation, when in truth we pass mostly unseen. There is comfort in this if we allow it. The knowledge that the stage is far larger than the spotlight we think follows us, and that beyond its beam lies the freedom to simply be. Chapter 8. The Bystander Effect. Why we don't always help. When we imagine emergencies, we like to picture ourselves as the kind of person who would step forward without hesitation. We tell ourselves we would rush to help the injured, speak up for someone in danger, or intervene when something is clearly wrong. But human behavior in real-life crises often does not match these private ideals. Sometimes, when a person is in obvious need, dozens of people may be present, and yet no one acts. This puzzling tendency is known as the bystander effect, a social psychological phenomenon in which the presence of other people reduces the likelihood that any one individual will intervene. The bystander effect first came into sharp public focus in 1964, following the murder of Kitty Genovese in New York City. Initial newspaper reports claimed that 38 witnesses had seen or heard parts of the attack, and yet failed to call the police or come to her aid. Although later investigations revealed that this account was oversimplified, some witnesses did call authorities, and the number of people who saw the attack in full was smaller than initially reported. The story nonetheless spurred intense interest in understanding why people sometimes fail to act in emergencies. Psychologists John Darley and Bib Latané conducted a series of experiments in the late 1960s to investigate the phenomenon. In one classic study, participants were placed in separate cubicles and told they would be speaking with other participants over an intercom about personal issues. During the session, one of the voices, actually a recording, began to sound distressed, simulating a seizure. The key manipulation was how many other people the participant believed were listening. When participants thought they were the only witness, the majority quickly sought help. But when they believed several others were also listening, the rate of intervention dropped sharply, and many took much longer to respond. Darley and Latané proposed two main mechanisms to explain this effect. The first is diffusion of responsibility. When multiple people are present, the sense of personal obligation to act is diluted. Each individual assumes that someone else will take responsibility. The second is social influence. In ambiguous situations, people look to others for cues on how to behave. If no one else appears alarmed or is moving to help, each person may conclude that the situation is not urgent, even if their own instincts suggest otherwise. Later research has identified additional factors that can influence the bystander effect. Ambiguity plays a significant role. In clear-cut emergencies, for example, a visible injury after a car accident, the likelihood of intervention is higher. But when the nature of the problem is uncertain, people hesitate, partly out of fear of overreacting or embarrassing themselves if the situation turns out to be harmless. Perceived danger to the helper also matters. People are less likely to intervene if they believe doing so could put them at serious risk, such as stepping into a violent confrontation. Cultural and social norms can also shape bystander behavior. In communities with strong norms of mutual assistance, intervention rates can be higher. In contrast, in highly individualistic or socially fragmented environments, people may feel less connected to strangers and less compelled to help. Familiarity with the victim increases the likelihood of help, as does perceiving the victim as part of one's own social group. Neuroscience research has begun to explore the brain processes involved in bystander decision-making. The anterior cingulate cortex and the amygdala, regions involved in emotional response and assessing social situations, appear to play a role in weighing the urgency of an event and the potential personal cost of acting. Interestingly, brain imaging studies suggest that when people see someone in distress, their empathic neural responses can be dampened if they are in a group context, potentially reflecting the influence of social cues that downplay the need for action. The bystander effect is not an inevitable outcome in all group situations. People do act in emergencies, often heroically, even when surrounded by others. However, the effect represents a statistical tendency. On average, the presence of more witnesses correlates with slower and less frequent intervention. Exceptions are more likely when someone has specialized skills relevant to the emergency, for instance, medical training, or when they feel a strong moral or personal duty to the person in need. Training and awareness can reduce the bystander effect. Programs that teach people to recognize emergencies, assess their own ability to help, and take initiative have been shown to increase intervention rates. Bystander intervention training is now a common part of safety education in schools, workplaces, and universities. These programs emphasize breaking through the paralysis that can arise in group settings, encouraging individuals to see themselves as the person who will act rather than assuming someone else will. It is also worth noting that some situations produce the opposite of the bystander effect, a phenomenon known as the reverse bystander effect, where the presence of others actually increases the likelihood of helping. This is more likely in emergencies that are unambiguous and low risk, or in close-knit communities where social bonds are strong. In these contexts, seeing others take action can be contagious, prompting more people to join in. The bystander effect has been studied not only in physical emergencies, but also in online environments. Cyberbullying, for instance, often unfolds in public digital spaces where many people can see harmful comments or harassment. Observers may hesitate to intervene for reasons similar to those in offline contexts: uncertainty about the situation, diffusion of responsibility, and fear of social repercussions. However, some studies suggest that online anonymity can sometimes lower inhibitions against stepping in, especially if individuals feel protected from retaliation. The phenomenon also intersects with moral psychology. Many people want to see themselves as compassionate and helpful, but inaction in the moment can create a gap between self-image and behavior. This gap can lead to post-event rationalization, telling oneself that the victim was fine, that help was already on the way, or that one's own involvement was unnecessary. These rationalizations reduce the discomfort of inaction, but can also prevent people from learning to act differently in the future. While the bystander effect has sometimes been framed as evidence of human selfishness, it is better understood as a product of our social wiring. Humans are highly sensitive to social context, constantly adjusting behavior based on perceived norms, risks, and group dynamics. In the ancestral environments in which our social instincts evolved, caution in ambiguous situations may have been adaptive. Acting too hastily could invite unnecessary risk. But in the modern world, where emergencies often require rapid and decisive action, this caution can lead to tragic consequences. Understanding the bystander effect allows for practical steps to counter it. Even small actions, such as making eye contact with other bystanders and clearly stating, "You call for help," can break the paralysis of collective inaction. By assigning responsibility explicitly, diffusion of responsibility is disrupted. Similarly, confidently moving toward the person in need can serve as a social cue that galvanizes others to assist. The bystander effect also offers a lens for thinking about moral courage. Helping in emergencies is not only about empathy, it is about overcoming the subtle social and psychological forces that encourage passivity. It asks individuals to accept that they may stand out, be noticed, and possibly judged for their actions, and to act anyway. In reflecting on this phenomenon, it becomes clear that while we often imagine ourselves as independent decision makers, our behavior is deeply embedded in the social currents around us. The presence of others can embolden or restrain us, sometimes in ways we do not consciously recognize. The bystander effect is a reminder that moral action often requires stepping out of the flow of social conformity, even if only for a moment. And perhaps here lies its quiet existential message. In a world where so many lives touch ours only in passing, the choice to act when it would be easier to do nothing is a way of affirming our shared humanity. Most people will not remember who called for help, who stepped forward, who broke the silence. But for the one who needed it, that moment can be everything. And in the vast anonymity of modern life, those moments are where our presence truly matters. Chapter 9. The Mandela Effect. When many share the same false memory. Memory is one of the most fascinating and yet least reliable functions of the human mind. We often imagine it as a faithful recording, a mental archive where past events are stored exactly as they happened, ready to be replayed on demand. But decades of psychological research have shown that memory is not a perfect recording device. It is a reconstruction pieced together from fragments of sensory impressions, knowledge, and inference. And because it is reconstructed each time we recall it, it can change. One of the most striking illustrations of this is the phenomenon known as the Mandela Effect, a situation where large numbers of people confidently remember an event or detail that, according to the best available evidence, did not occur as they recall it. The name comes from the fact that many people, particularly in the United States and other English-speaking countries, claim to remember Nelson Mandela dying in prison in the 1980s. In reality, Mandela was released from prison in 1990 and went on to become the president of South Africa in 1994. Yet the false memory persists, complete with imagined news reports and emotional reactions that feel as real to those who hold them as any genuine memory. The term Mandela Effect was popularized in 2009 by paranormal researcher Fiona Broom, who noticed she and others shared this specific false memory. Since then, it has been applied to a wide range of similar collective misrememberings. People insist that the children's book series The Berenstain Bears was spelled Berenstein, that a famous scene from Star Wars included Darth Vader saying, "Luke, I am your father," when the actual line is, "No, I am your father," or that the Monopoly mascot once wore a monocle, which he never did. From a psychological perspective, the Mandela Effect is a large-scale example of what memory researchers have long known. Our recollections are malleable and susceptible to distortion. Memory is not a fixed photograph, but an evolving narrative, one that can be subtly altered by suggestion, inference, and cultural reinforcement. When the same cues or suggestions circulate widely, large groups of people can end up sharing the same altered memory. One of the core mechanisms behind this is what psychologists call memory conformity, or social contagion of memory. When people discuss an event with others, their recollections can shift toward what they hear, even if the new details are inaccurate. Over time, the altered version feels as authentic as the original. This can happen unconsciously, without any intent to deceive. In fact, confidence in a false memory often increases when it is reinforced socially, because the agreement of others feels like validation. Another contributing factor is the reliance on schemas, mental frameworks we use to organize and interpret information. Schemas help us fill in gaps when details are missing or unclear, making our memories feel complete. But they can also lead us to misremember. For example, if we expect a wealthy, old-fashioned cartoon character to wear a monocle because it fits our cultural image of the type, we might remember one even if it was never there. Similarly, because many people's mental representation of the Berenstain Bears includes the more familiar spelling Stein, common in surnames, they may unconsciously rewrite the memory to match the expectation. False memories can also arise from repeated exposure to incorrect information. This is known as the misinformation effect, extensively studied by psychologist Elizabeth Loftus. In experiments, participants who were shown misleading information about an event they had witnessed later incorporated those false details into their own recollections. The effect is powerful enough to create vivid, specific false memories. For instance, remembering having been lost in a shopping mall as a child when in fact it never happened. The Mandela effect, then, is not mysterious in the sense of defying psychological explanation, but it is remarkable in its scale and its ability to make us question the reliability of our own minds. Part of its fascination comes from the fact that these are not isolated cases of individual misremembering. They are shared, often across continents, and can involve details that seem trivial but are remembered with great certainty. Some people interpret the Mandela effect in more speculative ways, suggesting it is evidence of alternate realities or shifts between parallel universes. In these interpretations, differing memories are seen as traces of having once lived in a slightly different timeline. While this is a compelling idea for science fiction, there is no empirical evidence to support it. Cognitive psychology offers explanations that do not require rewriting the laws of physics, but the very appeal of the multiverse theory speaks to how deeply unsettling it can be to discover that our shared memories might be wrong. It is worth noting that the Mandela effect often involves details that are just plausible enough to slip past our mental filters. A completely alien detail might be dismissed instantly, but one that fits a familiar pattern is more likely to be integrated into memory without resistance. This plausibility makes the false memory feel natural and therefore harder to challenge. Cultural reinforcement plays a major role as well. Misquotes in films, for example, can be perpetuated through parodies, advertising, or informal retellings until they become more widely known than the actual line. Over time, the incorrect version becomes the one people expect to hear, and their memories adapt accordingly. Once that happens, even seeing the original version may not fully overwrite the false memory. The mind can explain away the discrepancy by assuming it's a different version or an edit. The neuroscience of memory sheds light on why these distortions can be so compelling. When we recall an event, the neural representation of that memory becomes malleable for a brief period, a process known as reconsolidation. During this time, new information, whether accurate or not, can be integrated into the memory trace. Once reconsolidated, the altered memory feels just as real as the original. This process happens automatically without conscious awareness, making it easy for misinformation to seep in. The Mandela effect underscores a broader truth. Memory serves the needs of the present as much as it preserves the past. We remember in order to make sense of our experiences, to support our identities and to navigate our social worlds. If that means smoothing over inconsistencies or reshaping details to fit our understanding, the mind will do it. Accuracy is valuable, but coherence often takes precedence. From a practical standpoint, understanding the Mandela effect has implications for areas like eyewitness testimony, historical research, and even everyday communication. If large groups of people can share the same false memory, it becomes clear that confidence in a recollection is not a guarantee of accuracy. This is why legal systems have increasingly recognized the need for corroborating evidence beyond witness statements, especially in high-stakes cases. At the same time, the Mandela effect invites a certain humility about the reliability of our own recollections. It reminds us that what feels certain can still be wrong, that the vividness of a memory is no proof of its truth. In a way, it is a gentle challenge to our sense of infallibility and an invitation to remain curious about how our minds shape the stories we tell ourselves about the past. There's also a strangely communal aspect to the phenomenon. Discovering that others share your false memory can be oddly comforting, as though it validates the experience. Even when the memory is demonstrably wrong, the sense of shared recall can strengthen social bonds. It becomes a kind of collective folklore, a story about the way we all sometimes get things wrong together. And perhaps that is where the existential reflection emerges. In a universe where the past is fixed but our perception of it is fluid, we live partly in worlds of our own making. The Mandela effect is a reminder that reality is not just what happened, but what we remember, and that those memories are living, shifting things. In the grand theater of our shared existence, the script is always being rewritten, and sometimes without realizing it, we are all playing from the same mistaken page. Chapter 10. The Observer Effect. Behavior changes under watchful eyes. Human beings are social creatures. We are deeply attuned to the presence of others, not only to their words and actions, but to the subtle fact of being seen. The awareness that someone is watching us or even might be watching us can change the way we act, think, and feel. This is the essence of the observer effect in psychology, the phenomenon in which people alter their behavior because they know or believe they are being observed. The observer effect has many forms, depending on the situation and the level of observation. In its simplest sense, it can be seen in the way people straighten their posture when someone enters the room, adjust their tone when speaking to a supervisor, or become more deliberate when performing a task in front of an audience. In more formal research contexts, it is closely related to what is known as the Hawthorne effect, a term that originated from studies at the Western Electric Hawthorne Works factory in the 1920s and 1930s. In those studies, workers appeared to improve their productivity when changes were made to their work environment, such as adjusting lighting or break schedules. But further analysis revealed that the improvements were less about the changes themselves and more about the fact that the workers knew they were part of a study and were being watched. This awareness can have both positive and negative consequences. On the positive side, observation can prompt people to bring their behavior closer to their own ideals or to socially accepted norms. Knowing that one is being evaluated can lead to greater effort, more careful work, and increased attention to detail. On the negative side, it can create self-consciousness, anxiety, and performance pressure that interfere with natural behavior and reduce performance quality. The exact effect often depends on the person's confidence in the task and the nature of the observation. One reason the observer effect is so powerful is that human behavior is rarely just about internal goals. It is also about managing impressions. Impression management is the process by which we try to influence how others perceive us. This can involve consciously choosing our words, adjusting our body language, or avoiding behaviors that might be judged unfavorably. The drive to manage impressions is deeply ingrained because reputation and social standing have been important throughout human evolution. In small groups, where everyone's behavior was visible and remembered, being seen as trustworthy, competent, and cooperative could be a matter of survival. Neuroscientific research shows that being observed activates brain regions involved in social evaluation, such as the medial prefrontal cortex and the temporoparietal junction. These areas help us simulate other people's perspectives and predict how they might interpret our actions. When we believe we are being watched, these systems become more active, subtly guiding our behavior toward what we think will be viewed positively. This is one reason even symbolic cues of observation, such as images of eyes or surveillance cameras, can change behavior. Studies have found that placing posters with watchful eyes above donation boxes increases contributions, and similar images can reduce littering in public spaces. Interestingly, the observer effect can operate even without direct human observation. In experiments, people have been shown to alter their behavior when told that a computer is recording their actions for later review, even if no one is actively watching in real time. The possibility of later evaluation is enough to create the sense of a social audience. The effect can also interact with social norms in powerful ways. When people think they are being observed, they are more likely to follow established rules, whether those involve honesty, politeness, or cooperation. This can help explain why visible security measures in public places sometimes deter rule breaking, even when they are not actively monitored. However, the same mechanism can also make people less willing to deviate from harmful norms if they believe those norms are widely approved. Observation tends to amplify conformity, for better or worse. Performance in skill-based tasks often shows a more complex relationship with observation. In psychology, this is described by social facilitation theory. The presence of an audience can enhance performance on simple or well-practiced tasks, but impair performance on complex or unfamiliar ones. This happens because being observed increases physiological arousal. The body and brain prepare for social evaluation. For tasks that are automatic and familiar, this arousal sharpens focus and execution. For tasks that require working memory, creativity, or fine motor control, it can introduce anxiety and overthinking, leading to mistakes. The observer effect can be especially significant in scientific research. When people know they are participants in a study, they may alter their behavior to match what they believe the researchers expect, or to present themselves in a favorable light. This can make it difficult to measure genuine, unaltered behavior. Researchers address this challenge through methods such as unobtrusive observation, using hidden recording equipment where ethically permissible, or employing deception about the true focus of the study to reduce self-conscious responding. Outside of research settings, the observer effect is evident in countless everyday contexts. In workplaces, employees may adhere more strictly to safety procedures when supervisors are present, but relax those standards when they believe no one is watching. In education, students often participate more actively when they know their contributions will be noted by the teacher. On social media, the awareness of an audience can shape how people present themselves, encouraging the curation of carefully selected images and narratives. It is important to note that the observer effect is not just about altering behavior to please others. It can also make people more aware of their own actions. In some cases, observation prompts reflection and deliberate choice, which can lead to more ethical or thoughtful behavior. For example, knowing that one's work will be reviewed might encourage a writer to think more deeply about clarity and accuracy, or a surgeon to double-check a procedure. The effect is not purely about external pressure. It can also activate internal standards. At the same time, constant observation can have psychological costs. In environments where people feel they are always being watched, such as heavily surveilled workplaces or public spaces, the result can be heightened stress, reduced sense of autonomy, and diminished intrinsic motivation. The constant demand for impression management can be exhausting, leading people to feel they must always be on, rather than able to relax into their natural rhythms. The observer effect also plays a role in moral and prosocial behavior. People are more likely to act generously or helpfully when they believe they are being observed. In evolutionary terms, this can be understood as a form of reputation management. Public generosity can signal trustworthiness and social value. However, this raises interesting questions about the authenticity of such behavior. If someone gives to charity primarily because others are watching, is the act less genuine? In practical terms, the motive may matter less than the outcome. The help still reaches those who need it. But from a psychological standpoint, it reminds us that human altruism is often intertwined with the desire for social approval. Modern technology has made the observer effect more pervasive. With the prevalence of cameras, tracking systems, and online visibility, people are often aware, consciously or unconsciously, that their actions may be recorded. This has the potential to nudge behavior toward greater accountability, but it can also create a subtle, ongoing self-consciousness. For some, this awareness fades into the background. For others, it becomes a constant undercurrent shaping daily life. In certain situations, the observer effect can help protect against harmful behavior. For example, drivers often slow down when they know speed cameras are present, and public officials may act with more transparency when they know their actions are under scrutiny. Yet the effect can also stifle innovation or candor in contexts where taking risks or expressing unconventional ideas is important. The knowledge of being watched can make people default to safe, familiar choices rather than exploring untested possibilities. Ultimately, the observer effect underscores a central feature of human psychology. Our behavior is never purely private. Even when alone, we carry imagined audiences in our minds, the internalized perspectives of family, peers, colleagues, and society at large. These internal observers can be as influential as real ones, guiding our actions in ways we may not fully realize. And perhaps this is where the quiet existential truth emerges. In the end, we live much of our lives in relation to eyes we can see and eyes we can only imagine. The sense of being observed, whether by others or by the standards we carry within ourselves, shapes not just how we behave, but how we understand who we are. In a universe vast enough to swallow all our moments into silence, the awareness of being seen, even fleetingly, is part of what makes our actions feel real. My friend, thank you for joining me on this quiet journey through the hidden patterns of the mind. If you're still awake and wish to keep wandering, another story is waiting for you, just a soft click away. And if your eyes are already heavy, May your dreams carry you gently among the stars. Sleep well.